Welcome to Transylvania Theater's virtual multimedia production of Maurice Manning's Railsplitter based on his book of poetry. My name is Tasha Fowler. I'm the chair of theater here at Transy, and I am coming to you live right now on the Transy campus in front of Little Theater. Well, actually, I'm not live, but I am doing this improvisationally just to give you a little bit of that theatrical flair that we all love. Railsplitter by Maurice Manning is a book of poems that he has written in the posthumous voice of President Abraham Lincoln. These poems are beautiful and articulate and complex in all the right ways. In them, Abraham Lincoln reflects on his life, his personal life, his professional life, his wife and kids, the Civil War, the country, the state of the country, and then the people in the country whom he loved so well. What we've done at Transy is we've taken these poems and we have artistically translated them into performance pieces. So you're going to see everything from a direct address, as I'm doing right now, to a music video and music composition, to solo performance, to multimedia work. It really is to dance even. I mean, it really is a choose your own adventure, and we are so excited that you are along for the ride. We're also excited because we were able to use over 70 members of our community on this. So you're gonna experience a first year's work who has never worked in this medium, to guest artists who are professionals in this work, to faculty and staff who some work in this professionally and some just have this amazing artistic ability and were able to contribute to us even though this isn't what their day job is. You're going to see alumni who date back to 1969 and alumni from all over the country, as we were able to provide them a platform to create artistically because we're doing this remote. And I know that this is a strange time right now. I know that we would all, or I would rather be inside Little Theater than outside recording this to you today. This is my big curtain speech. But unfortunately, the pandemic is such that we can't do that. But it does provide us an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to keep each other safe, but it's also an opportunity to rethink the way that we do things, and to let our community know that we're thinking about them, and we can create a communal space even though we have to be far apart. In doing this project, I really had to ask myself multiple times, what is theater? And what are the essential elements of theater? And the 4 elements I came up with were joy, creation, collaboration, and community. And those were the elements that I stressed to everyone participating in this collaboration. And I offer these to you today or tonight or whenever or wherever you watch this. I hope that this brings you some joy. I hope that you get to experience our creation. I hope that you get to experience our collaboration. And most of all, I hope that you give yourself a moment to sit back, close your eyes, breathe in, and know that you are a part of this bigger community. And I hope that you feel this togetherness, knowing that we're all watching this, no matter when we watch it or where we watch it, together. And another exciting thing is we do get to not only serve our community, but because this is something that we're putting on video, we get to reach out to new community members, and we get to create a new community, new friends, and new family. So on behalf of all of us here at Transy, we offer you Railsplitter, and we hope you enjoy the show.
That part of the country is, within itself, as unpoetical as any spot of the earth. That is a claim I would revise if I were living now. I aspired to poetry back then, to be thought of as wise and full of feeling, to capture something in the world, to put some words and rhythms and rhyme, and follow the fashion of the time. A poem had to be sincere, and it had to be pretty, and the poem had to reveal the poet's virtues. nothing to ruffle the feathers of taste or to confess a human flaw. Art and perfection were bound together. But I won't subscribe to perfect art. Not now. I believe that poetry is made from absence, out of nothing, or no place real. The poem flies as coldly as a hawk, or else as sweetly as a wren, or it trots along as an old blind horse. The mind is an empty theater, and there is nothing on the stage. Yet from the dark void of voice begins to sound itself and say its terrible lines, and then to change them, to make them smoother, to make them more than words and more than a dream in the mind. And then the words in the mind are free, and the poet too is free, until another voice speaks from the darkness. I was born and raised in purgatory, and I heard many voices there. One was even my mother's, singing. Others I heard in books or silence. And then one day I heard my own, a voice so clear it startled me.
I like the one about the banjo player, who takes his banjo with him when he meets his friends up in the sky. The verse says, "Something else am mighty true, de banjo gwine to be dar too." The wit delivered by the primitive voice. And I can't argue with the theology. At least it's interesting. If banjos are allowed in heaven, then there's something to do besides patiently counting down eternity or basking in holy light. Not that it matters much to me. In my state of being merely a mind that's tuned, I suppose, to resonate. Let's call it a twang in there, a very American twang, originating from a gourd and a stick and a few strings. A nonsense song may have a deeper meaning or not. Or maybe it acquires meaning through time. That's very American too. Meaning catching up with time, or time simply ceasing to matter. And the truth is left as plain and silent as a banjo hanging from a peg on the wall. I like that image. A plain American image. And something else am mighty true. A banjo with a metaphorical shadow, ironically attached to it. An image like that, suspended in time, will change.
Dear Mr. President, very well, I contradict myself, according to the circumstance. I'll not deny recorded facts, nor seek to justify positions I didn't take, yet later took. Conscience has its little limbo, the realm where the soul of a thought is stuck, forever lodged in history. If one would strive to be in the right, yet nevertheless be in the wrong, what then? I know no dia scheme or transcendental light to lead the way from such predicament. Yet to deny the wrong is wrong. A wrong may be forgiven, but denial of wrong implies there is no wish to be forgiven.
How many men go to their graves believing they were in the right? Mythologies are built upon this. Actions and consequences and bends. In the truth, covering original sin.
A man who believes that he stands above the law has not sufficiently studied the law of either God or man. This is the sort of proclamation I'd say to myself when confronting my wrongs, but even that wasn't enough. To wash blood from my hands, or free me, to enter the country of redemption, if such a place exists at all, unblemished. Like a long shadow, my compromises have followed me to an afterlife far longer than my life.
Oh, itchy beast of tiny figure. When I scratched myself, I made you bigger. Though you began as but a chigger, you redder rose, a pistol butt without a trigger. Thus we were foes. In armpit high or ankle lower, you left me last to be the knower. That you were first to be the goer in places where sweat may trickle. And I was felled, as by a mower with scythe and sickle. Though felled hyperbolizes, true, the minor wounds I got from you. The itchiness I felt undue, a fierce attacking I never would have dreamed to woo from one so lacking. Yet me, you often so infested, I felt my life had been divested. And bitterness had been ingested in the hotter days of youth, when meaning is contested in lofty ways. Yet with age and temperament I seasoned, and with your kind I learned. And reason as an older dog contends with fleas, and resolves the pest deserves its life, though it has treasoned, and takes his rest. You are a bug of southern climes, yet strangely strode all through my times. Symbolically, a bell whose chimes in turn are grating, refusing love to find that rhymes are dull negating.
Why, bless its heart, his mama said, and smacked the back of Billy's head. A lawyer man must stand up tall, but honey, you're a tad bit small. Perhaps another line you'll choose, or fetch a taller pair of shoes. I fear you'll wind up with that fool who never went a year to school. There once was a man named Herndon, who fell for a gal that spurned him. They bowed at the dance, there endeth romance, but nevertheless it burned him. Like me, ordained by the emptiness of Kentucky, removed, like me, to the emptiness of the prairie, and both of us standing there before the emptiness, the physical and metaphysical, believing surely something is in both, a cause, a purpose, uneasy, steady friendship, thoughts to keep to ourselves, a world to make, philosophy, geometry to ponder, and everywhere poetry to savor, and even matchless Billy, a joke to tell.
I will allow a tall hat can be put to purposes other than the polite covering of the head. And the record shows I carried papers in mine, important papers, too. And for dramatic effect, I'd pull them out in court, bewildering my opponents. But that was practical. The documents intended to prove my claim were sheltered from the weather and less likely to be lost. And having the words I'd taken care to write proximate to the head from which they sprang, permitted me to ponder them, to keep them, so to speak, in the nest a little longer, before they flew into the room to batter against the smudged windows of a prairie courthouse, amid the clangs of a punctuating spittoon. It was a commonplace to fill my hat with oats and feed my horse as I was riding along the circuit. And the rooming houses where I lodged had few accommodations, so the hat was handy as a basin if a morning ablution were required. On this occasion, however, the hat was mere amusement for the boys who set it on the office floor and pitched pennies into it, stepping farther back each round as I was reading on the couch. Their mother was indeed at church. The weather was profoundly cold and the privy regrettably distant from the office, so, boys being boys, with a famously permissive father, I agreed to let them use my boot.
When a public man makes a claim designed to appeal to popular opinion, subverting the fact that underneath that claim a more insidious aim resides, which when discovered will prove to be unpopular, that man has drawn a line across his throat. And yet the public will not have the truth, which gives the public man his license and leisure to subvert it. Our citizens are mean and simple, expecting hope and hot reaction at once. If their inclusion in a scheme or proposition requires excluding others from the same in general, they'll rally to it. Folly, selfishness, or merely the long drag of deprivation, as an animal dragging an implement against unyielding ground, when the switch is smartly applied, continues its way. And the man who wields the switch is praised for the moment, but then he'll be undone.
I was a superstitious son of a biscuit eater, and I couldn't abide robbing Paul to pay off Peter, so to speak, as a matter of principle. Yet personal life was different concerning the boys and extravagant wife. I was indulgent with them, protective whatever they needed. I provided, believing happiness when so well pleaded deserved my attention. Their delight gave me delight. That was how I loved when alive, and now in this night I grasp the imperfection, but what else should one do? You love your people and do what love requires of you. If suddenly love demands of body and of mind, for example, going to the ends of the earth to find a primitive conjure woman who owns the only stone around imbued with healing powers for body and bone. I did it for my boy who was bitten by a dog, and the stone prevented him from going mad. A fog, a total fog, recalling now such desperation, and to think of how desperately I also love the nation, and I grasp the imperfection, but what else should one do? You love your people and do what love requires of you. direction, but what else should one do? You love your people and do what love requires of you. And I was a father of boys and fathered ideas too. And stubbornly America, I fathered you. And stubbornly America, I fathered you.
Conceiving a mind in torment, as Poe was known to do, or a heart forever in grief, in which he also dabbled, must have a purpose beyond amusement. Being mad or lonely is too easy, and neither tries the imagination. I believe in the value of whim and wonder. I believe that walking toward the horizon to become a speck in the distance, one may not be thinking of anything. Maybe the body wants to go, and the mind is content to be empty, or to believe there is nothing in it. Arriving out of view and alone, however, the mind is filled like a cup. Wonders and beauties are pouring out, an inexplicable passion has risen like a daisy, and one may sing or be completely silent, and feel the opposite of alone, and be at peace, and continue on, and leave no record of having been a person at all, to be seen walking in the distance, going out of view.
What prompts a long and skinny man?
To hanker for a stout woman.
Indeed, a woman whose stoutness stands.
In marked contrast to the man's gangly, elongated frame. The history of human pairing.
My own uncertain tries and erring.
And even after marriage, staring.
Into the well of wonder despairing that such a condition wants a name. Yet humming rhymes delightedly, I've found there is a history.
Conveyed by earthy poetry, the Jack Sprat philosophy.
So I dominated the game.
As if tranced and danced round my mind, recalling Wyatt's hunt of the hind, and Herrick's puns for how he finds those tremblings of different kinds. So for my love, I found the same.
I died in service of the state, but the tireless cause did not abate the instinct I felt to procreate, or mere heatedly to mate.
With Mary, short and stout, and close the daylight out.
And blindly many times to her I came.
The smell of open ground in spring. My brother's grave unmarked, my mother's too, and later my sister's, and finally my father's. All of them namelessly entered the ground. A human history, the sign that's known because it's missing how innumerable existences have come and gone to dust, and the eye of time refuses to blink. Someone digging a hole and singing and crying, then someone loved is dropped in the ground and buried. No wonder, believing in the afterlife and walking down a street of gold appeals. What is the point of being alive in the world? What's the point of watching your mother die? Or the point of going to her bedside, knowing the knowledge of death had set like the sun in her mind, and she whispered, "Be a good son." When metaphor and truth become the same, when the distance is erased between the fact and the figure representing it, one seeks, blindly perhaps, another metaphor. Behind a horse and a plow, I opened the ground in 3 states, sometimes reading a book as I went. Once, in the middle of Pilgrim's Progress, I realized the furrows in the field could just as well be verses on the page. And the point of being alive fell down on me, and the smell of open ground brought me to tears. While irony may wrap itself around a poem, the true poem in the end escapes the shroud. It's the art of resurrection.
You sockdologizing old man trap!
I was laughing hard when the bullet entered my mind. An abrupt idea lodging there unfinished, and I had brayed like a donkey earlier in the play. Following such misery and discord, it was a pleasure to hear laughter, to hear the uproar of the audience, and to feel my hand involuntarily reach out and clap my knee as if it now again belonged to me. Tragedy divides and turns on willful, moral division. But comedy unifies by accident, and the restoration of order is a surprise. And so by accident, I was united for a moment, for a little span of time.
I told the biggest, toughest boy in Clary's Grove, "If you don't hush, I'll pick you up and spit in your ass." The coarsest thing I ever said to anyone. And his eyes widened at my boast. And a boast it was, a saying I merrily heard, so not original to me. But I liked it, 'cause it conjured an image. I had to struggle to see, but when I saw it clearly, it made me laugh. And I sought occasions to say the saying when I was younger, like a riddle or a dirty rhyme. I liked to hear it. I thought of it as a jocular interruption of the air, because too much solemnity is duller than a butter knife. Humble people like to laugh, but those incapable of laughter struck me as already dead, or not sufficiently alive. And that was the purpose of my life, to make others feel more alive, either by wisdom, or vulgar phrases, or nonsense, whose sudden utterance is like the bell of beauty ringing.
The man apologizes for his verse and adds an A to never. His birth began both life and curse, a doom almost forever.
A man whose education was none, whose freedom was bound by locks. But once emancipation was won, he became Hannibal Cox.
He said, "Let every heart be true, and may God defend the right. For we have glorious work to do, the stripes and the stars of light.
And on his verse I've puzzled long until my brow is worn. A slave may better sing the song than one to freedom born.
So the hopeful letter he sent to me, that history may tell the bonds of love and poetry, and then he said farewell. The verse I read of this young man
went with me when I died.
The pages trembled in my hand, and finishing I cried.
I wrote to a minister once, and twice misspelled a very curious word: sacrifice. Not knowing at the time the cloud that word would fill a few years later, a cloud over a nation whose understanding of the word I've come to question. Having had my brains blown out at a theater as a comedy was playing on the stage has given me, shall we say, a unique perspective on the matter. My death was not a sacrifice, but simply the period at the end of a long sentence. A sentence too few of my countrymen have read. And I was not the author of it. But the sentence included me. I was a phrase in its grammar. As for stumbling twice on sacrifice, it was the middle syllable that stumped me.
When my melancholy was most profound in younger days, I was tempted sometimes to follow an old track in the woods and cease to be, to disappear. I could wander into oblivion, to live and die in the wilderness, as I was accustomed in my youth. Civilization was not my haunt. Mortality meant nothing to me when darker feelings were overwhelming. Why I succumbed to such feelings, or nearly so, is a mystery, and remains mysterious after all these years. I've contemplated it and can offer few conclusions. There's darkness in the world. Our common experience. We contend with it, and we ignore it. And that was my experience. You can wander off alone and die. Or you can fight that loneliness. To do something true for once with your life. Or something in life can call you to it, like making a country survive itself, and leading your people through certain darkness, and leading them even after that. I did what I could, and doubted it. I saw the track, yet turned away. I looked at the wilderness and the woods, and went on going for a town, to reach another human mind, the ambiguity of life and being alive. That is the mystery. And there's a common rhythm to it, a joy. And joy, or my perception of it, saved me.
I was killed by an actor, a famous, glamorous young man known for playing the tragic roles, and I was a president whose face was coarse and enigmatic, though marked by a conscious mole. But the derringer he stuck behind my ear produced, in the end, a dark, symbolic hole, American and bottomless, no tears can fill it. Your Melville had the accurate verse. What like a bullet can undeceive? Hear, hear, the antique eloquence of the national curse. What an ironic martyr I've been. I'm long in a realm that has no ceilings, though dying was worse. There is a mystery to being wrong, and that has darkened the shadows of my mind. Mainly, how I could like the song, away down yonder in the land of cotton, for its rhyme, and what else should I call it but jauntiness, and ignore the euphemistic old times. Make up a song to cover sin, boundless and almost unimaginable sin. My task has been to stare it in the face, faceless though it is. We share a common dark. A mask is what we have. One voice and total silence, and verse intended not to answer but ask the obvious question hanging in the distance of time. Who is that swinging from the gallows, my friends, united by love and innocence? Who is buried in those endless rows, those silent lines of American poetry where metaphors and muses refuse to go?
It watered the farm on 3 sides, gracing the field, my mother said, and nearly crossed itself in place after place for several miles before it emptied into Rolling Fork. If you were walking along the creek and you looked across the way, you could see exactly where you'd be after another mile or two of walking. Over there, an hour later, where you committed to follow the creek. The future wandered through the valley, winding like a snake in the grass. One day, we were planting pumpkins, and I looked across the bottom and I saw a couple of white men marching. 7 slaves chained together. The slaves were singing to pass the time. One of the white men was afraid to cross a body of water, so all of the party walked on the western bank. And they wound along the creek for hours, appearing and reappearing, headed upstream, but going south. Gracing the field, my mother said. And now I've gone and mentioned Old Knob Creek as if it's gone away. It ain't.
Go, 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 go.
Sometimes the details are alarming. In the middle of 1862, receiving my hero snuff box, for instance, as if it would inspire. Perhaps it did. I do recall I sniffed it many times and felt not quite alone in my position. I was environed with difficulties of mind and decision, piteous scenes. Wagons of amputated arms and legs going to graves for limbs surrendered by men who now would live with part of themselves already buried. Destruction plotted and carried out for preservation and new creation, an irony as vast as the land on which the destruction was conducted. Nothing to hold it all together, no saying or rhetorical claim other than knowing history eventually will make a chapter, however brief, of all that passes. Whether later generations will care to read the shorter ones has not been my concern. The country was founded not to suppress but to lift the common life. I learned that life requires connection to the dead. A synonym for life may not be death, but the closeness of the two, one's dependence on the other, has long absorbed my study, and that is plainly written on my face.
After giving a speech,
most often to men,
eventually I'd wander home and Mary would inquire about my elocution, whether
I'd hit my mark or fallen short or foundered.
That was a metaphor my Mary liked. I liked it too because it went two ways at once. Either the so-called ship got stuck on the bar or the faithful horse went lame. The meaning is restrained yet multiplied. In the primitive country where I was raised, someone would say he's nearly foundered if he'd had too much to eat. A cow, as I recall, could founder. I foundered myself, or nearly so, a time or two, and once it involved cabbage. I could eat the hell out of some cabbage, and then go at it again if there were any left. If a pone to sop the liquor in the pot was not at hand, why, I could drink it down in a gulp and draw a sleeve across my chin. It's humbling to be at a speaking engagement and observe how someone speaking passionately might still not make a lick of sense, and raising the passion only digs a deeper hole. And the argument, when overly explained or too voluminous, can lose its footing in the soup of words, to mix a metaphor, and sound like diarrhea of the mind. A mind with the trots, a spew of empty thoughts.
Better to shut your big fat trap and take a gander down to the fishing hole.
Not that it matters anymore to me. I'm afraid my days at the fishing hole are over, as are my speaking engagements and everything.
Not lilacs. I recall in spring flowers spreading over the pastures. Common wildflowers, too small to pick, probably unnoticed most of the time, although abundant. Ashy purple leaves shading the little pink blossoms, thus dimming and dulling their hue. Sometimes the fields from a distance seem soaked with blood, a wound for the country always returning, real and symbolic at once. Like art, like all creation, like love, with liberty and irony for all.
Stand above.
Give me the spark of nature's fire. That's all the learning I desire. Though all the wisdom learning lends will never make amends for difficulties scatological. Windiness, that's pathological. Though leaders toot, there's other fruit posterity must find. Sagely doodles left so silently behind. Or a smear of rhyme, maybe to remind that constipation loosely rhymes with nation. For the union I was knotted, as T's are crossed, and I's are dotted. How oft repairing to a dogged verse relieves the anguished human curse, and certainly won't make it worse. So here's a toot for the USA. A living burden to my dying day.
That was 1862, and February was the depth. And yet the grief went deeper still, continuing as an endless valley, and I was walking down it alone. Death was everywhere a fog, over the land and in my house. I concluded was where the fog began. I was alone, as I am now, to pronounce my soliloquies in the dark. And my thoughts did dive down. Am I a living ghost? What fate is now foreshadowed by this moment? How desperate must I be in this scene? What resolution must I make? To call for a horse? Where would I go? Something happens to time and despair. It ceases to divide, and yet division was my residence. So practicing soliloquies revealed my mind, and the absence of time gave me strangely time to practice. And I had a discerning audience, one who was familiar with my voice.
Trippingly on the tongue. So Hamlet says how lines must be delivered from the stage, especially when passions must be tempered and gestures must not be overdone, or else chaos will upend the unity desired. The groundlings, claims the Sun, are capable of nothing but dumb shows and noise, nicely reaching beyond the stage to pander and pun, which makes one wonder how serious is this entreaty then to hold a mirror up to nature. In the play within the play, a mousetrap catches a king unnaturally. To be or not to be was never my pick.
Oh, my offense is rank is the better speech. Heaven is how high it smells, the offense. Enlivened language for murder, ironically. Low act. But elevated thought to play lightly a scene of wretchedness and folly.
Oh, my offense is rank. It smells to heaven. It hath the primal eldest curse upon it, a brother's murder. Pray can I not, though inclination be as sharp as will, my stronger guilt defeats my strong intent. And as a man to double business bound, I stand in pause where I shall first begin, or both neglect. What if this cursed hand were thicker than itself with brother's blood? Is there not rain enough in the sweet heavens to wash it white as snow? Whereto serves mercy but to confront the visage of offense? And what's in prayer but the two-tone force to be forestalled ere we are to fall, or pardon being down? Then I'll look up. My fault is past. But oh, what form of prayer will serve my term? Forgive me my foul murder? No, that cannot be. For I still possess the effects for which I did the murder. Try what repentance can. What can it not? Yet what can it when one cannot repent? Oh, wicked state! Oh, bosom black as death! Oh, limed soul that struggles to be free and art more engaged! Help, angels! Make us say, bend stubborn knee, and heart with strings of steel softened like the sinews of a newborn babe. All may be well.
The claim my cousin offered after I died, that he'd killed a buzzard for a single feather in order to bend my fingers around the quill that I might learn the shapes of letters, is true. How strange that I could read most anything and grasp it. If I read it twice aloud, I could recall it ever after, word for word. There's a divinity that shapes our ends, a line from Hamlet I used to savor, because it sounds just right, yet the meaning bounds away as the mind, desiring comprehension, advances. And all of this before I could write my name, for what was printed differed from what was written. It didn't occur to me in early years that reading was the offspring of writing, so getting ahead in reading was backing up. Though once I began with letters, I hadn't ink, or money for it, or paper, and furthermore, I hadn't anything of my own to say. So I copied all of Hamlet in the air
from his father's ghost and onto York's skull, the black feather twittering like a wren. A single feather representing the bird in full. Synecdoche, I think it is. My mother, who could read but not write, presented all of her person with an X.
Poetry is the art of silence, the art of knowing when to stop a word or phrase and let it hang like a sheet billowing on the line. And the sudden or unexpected silence goes hand in hand with what is said in words or the flowery, natural phrase. Beginning with the idiom and moving to the metaphor while following the stark rhythms of thought as they proceed and follow is elegance, a wave of the hand for dancers to come forth and dance and give the scene a fluid movement. I see it all in a grand entrance, meaning I see it as entrancing, wrapped, and enthralling all there is. But what, in fact or dainty figure, is the scene? People in dark and bright attire coming closely together for a dance, for a spinning, exultant reel? I made myself present for such events, yet also removed myself to step away, to pause and reflect. And stepping away, I learned my candor. I learned how to pass my time in a phrase, in a measured phrase of poetry. And that is where I've tried to live.
I play in a play belonging to the ages, and silence is ringing out, as if designed by a mind whose poetry is empty pages.
The only player, too, on darkened stages, artistic in my way, though not refined. I play in a play belonging to the ages.
But theaters are merely painted cages, rooms to watch imagination confined by a mind whose poetry is empty pages.
In life I borrowed lines from all the sages, and found myself to airy nothings, inclined to play in a play belonging to the ages.
A tempest in this narrow house still rages as if the service of the dead is assigned by a mind whose poetry is empty pages.
A house divided? O formless form, whose wages must endlessly be paid, yet not divined, I play in a play belonging to the ages.
By a mind whose poetry is empty pages.
Interpreto en la obra que pertenece a lo largo. En silencio suena como si fuera de diseño. De una mente su poesía son páginas vacías. El único intérprete también en teatro oscuro, artístico a mi manera, pero no refinado. Interpreto en la obra que pertenece a lo largo. Pero los teatros son simplemente jaulas pintadas, cuartos donde miras imaginación encerrado. De una mente su poesía son páginas vacías. En la vida presto líneas de todas las salvias, y me encontré con aire de nada inclinado. Interpretar en la obra que pertenece a lo largo. La borrasca en esta casa angosta sigue rabiando, como si el servicio de los muertos fue asignado. De una mente su poesía son páginas vacías. Una casa dividida, y sin forma la forma que en saludo tiene que pagar continuamente, pero no divino. Interpreto en la obra que pertenece a lo largo. De una mente su poesía son páginas vacías.
Who are you people anyway? Does hearing my voice from the dead disturb you? You're probably wondering what to make of this performance. I wonder too, but it doesn't matter to me. I'm dead as words writ on the page. You have to find the life in them. That's the pleasure of listening to a voice on the stage or reading a book. There's something alive you bring to life by being the reader or seeing the show, and that makes being alive less lonely. All of this expression has been for you. I beg your pardon. I had to pause for a moment to think of the proper word. I expect you know how difficult it is to get the words just right. Expression is too precise. It's better to think of this as a series of notes and meditations which, by nature, are incomplete. One of the things you have to accept in life and art are the parts left out, the missing pieces, and the simply inexplicable. What's missing says something by being absent. It's a gesture of the mind to leave it out, and then the gesture of another mind to grasp the absence. But once the absence is grasped, it becomes a complicated emptiness. To fill it, we have the stage and books, but increasingly I find that musing on the emptiness is pleasant enough. As when looking over a landscape, one can see where a tree has been, even a wilderness, and contemplate what might have happened and imagine why. What else do you want from my countenance, from my exhausted face staring out?